تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير.
بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين، وأصلي وسلم على نبينا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن تمسك بسنته إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد. Continuing our journey and looking at the nature or the creation of the human being, which has been a common theme inside this second last juz of the Quran, or in general is the theme of near enough most of the Quran speaking about the human being. Whether we look at the beginning of the Quran, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala begins by mentioning Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, all praises belong to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Lord of the worlds, primarily the world, the Lord of this dunya, this world, the Lord of human beings, that which He has created. And then if we turn to the end of the Quran, Allah mentions Qul a'udhu bi Rabbin Nas, say I seek refuge with the Lord of mankind. So as if the whole beginning of the Quran, the end of the Quran, and throughout the Quran, the prime discussion is towards Al-Insan, towards the human being. Indeed, the first commandment inside the Quran, inside Surah Al-Baqarah, Allah mentions, Ya ayyuhan nas su'budu rabbakum alladhi khalaqakum walladhina min qablikum la'allakum tattaqun. Allah doesn't say, oh believing individuals, oh Muslims. Allah says, Ya ayyuhan nas, oh mankind, u'budu rabbakum, worship your Lord, all alone, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the human being, Al-Insan, you find is discussed through the Quran, this generic terminology about the human being, and the nature of the human being is mentioned. As Allah mentioned inside the Quran, وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا, man has been created in a state of weakness, is the open linguistic meaning. But in the context of this verse, وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ ضَعِيفًا, man has been created with shahwa, with desires, is the context of the verse inside Surah Al-Nisa that we find. وَخُلِقَ الْإِنسَانُ min ajal, man has been created in a state of hastiness, is another description of the human being. Allah also mentioned about the human being, إنه كان ظلوما جهولا وحملها الإنسان. Indeed, we did offer the trust to the heavens and the earth, and they refused to take it. وحملها الإنسان, and the human being decided to take on that trust. إنه كان ظلوما جهولا, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes that the human being will be oppressive, will be an ignorant individual, is how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the human being. So even with all of these flaws, how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala describes the human being, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala still loves the human being, has given the human being the prime reward, the prime prize of Jannah is given to the human being if they follow the steps or the path that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has laid out inside the Quran. So this surah, Surah Al-Insan, is speaking primarily about the beginning of the human being, and it begins to speak a large good few verses inside the surah speaking about paradise which were given to the human being who submits to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Surah Al-Insan, this surah that we find, is primarily a Meccan surah, even though some of the ulama of Tafseer, Abu Bakr al-Jazairi, Imam Shawkani, Sahib Fath al-Qadir, goes to the view that this is a Medinan surah based upon whereby it mentions that we feed asira, we feed the captives, the prisoners, we feed them. As we know, the captives or prisoners only came after the time period of Mecca, so they went to the opinion that this surah is a Medinan surah. But the majority of the ulama are of view this is a Meccan surah, and in all honesty, the context of these verses, the format of these verses and these words all prove this is a Meccan surah. And the rebuttal that some of the ulama have given regarding this view that this could be a Medinan surah, they say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala can speak about the future, or it's just a description of believers, of those individuals who feed the poor individuals and feed the captives and the prisoners. That could be a context of speaking about the future, about how believers, or these are the general characteristics of believers. It's not primarily speaking about the face of Medina. 5 general names have been given to this surah. The most common 2 names are Surah Al-Insan or Surah Al-Dahr, any time which is mentioned inside the surah. Hal ata ala al-insani hinun min ad-dahri lam yakun shay'an madhkura. Has it not come at the passing of time whereby man was unknown, where there's no respect to be given to the human being? So Al-Insan, Ad-Dahr are the common 2 names which this surah is known by. Imam Bukhari highlights this surah is known by the name of Hal ata ala al-insani, is a 3rd name because the hadith it mentions the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam would read Surah Alif Lam Mim Sajda, the 31st surah, and Surah Al-Insan for Fajr on Yawmul Jum'ati, and we'll come back to that in a second. So that's the third name, Hal Ata Ala Al-Insani. The fourth name is just Hal Ata, is some works of Tafseer mention, and the fifth name is Al-Amshaj, because the only place inside the Quran Allah uses the word Al-Amshaj is inside Surah Al-Insan. So some ulama Tafseer have given the surah the title of Al-Amshaj. So these are the five names I mentioned regarding the surah, the most common being Al-Insan or Ad-Dahr. Returning back to what Imam Bukhari entitled the surah as Hal Ata Ala Al-Insani, that the Prophet ﷺ read this surah, Surah Al-Insan, and Surah Alif Lam Mim Sajda, the 31st surah, on the during the Fajr of Yawmul Jum'ati. Ibn Taymiyyah begins to then discuss that why is these two specific surahs selected and read on Yawmul Jum'ah, because inside these two surahs, if you ponder over them carefully, it speaks about the creation of Adam alayhi salam, blessing him with the abilities or faculties of hearing and seeing, qalilan ma tashkurun, and only little do you give thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So it begins your day by showing gratitude towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala of creating the human being. Both these surahs speak about paradise, the reward given to the believing individuals. Both these surahs speak about the hereafter, or staying away from the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the punishment of the hellfire. And rather, some of the ulama go to even more deeper understanding that all those surahs or actions that link to Yawm al-Jum'ah, or reading Surah Al-Kahf on that day. Why specifically Surah Al-Kahf? Why these surahs to recite them in Fajr? Why Surah Al-Jum'ah? Why Surah Al-Munafiqun? Because all these surahs, they remind the individual about the essence of the human being and the role and the purpose of the human being. So on a Friday is that continuous reminder throughout the day about the essence of the human being. And as we mentioned, the whole theme of our discussion is about preparation, about the last day of coming in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah here inside the surah, Hal Ata Ala Al-Insan, begins by Hal. Has there not come upon the human being? So Hal, ulama say there's only two surahs inside the Quran that begin with this questioning. Hal is inside Surah Al-Insan and Surah Al-Ghashiyah. Hal Ataka Hadithul Ghashiyah. Even the word Hal, this questioning comes so many times inside the Quran, but these are the only two surahs that begin with this. And Hal huna bima'na al-ithbat, bima'na qad. Indeed, it has come upon the human being. Hal ataka hadith al-ghashiyah. Indeed, the discussion, the belief in al-ghashiyah is in one of the names, the overwhelming event is one of the names that their judgment has come. So affirming that the state of the human being, that the human being was nothing in existence before, and we've given the human being these beautiful characteristics have been given to the human being. So, Hal Ata Ala Al-Insani. Al-Insan. Who is this human being that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking about? Either it be the first human being Adam alayhi salam, is one view, or it carries the generic view that as we began this surah with, it carries the generic view of mankind, human beings, speaking about all of mankind, and is not specific to Adam alayhi salam. And that is in the general rule inside the Quran, that the Quran uses general terms and terminologies, so it applies to every single individual. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to be specific, will then use specific words and specific phrases. Innal muslimina wal muslimat wal mu'minina wal mu'minat, the believing men, the Muslim men, the Muslim women, the believing men, the believing women, will use specific words will be used towards those specific types of individuals. But when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala just uses general words, and it concerns every single human being, whether male, female, young or old, believers or disbelievers. It's a general khitab. So here is Al-Insan, is a general khitab, a general address for all human beings. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned, Hal ata ala al-insani heenu min ad-dahri lam yakun shay'an madhkura. Wasn't even worth mentioning the human being, meaning that the human being has no value in the human being, but then we've given that nobility and that rank to the human being. وَلَقَدْ كَرَّمْنَا بَنِي آدَمَ وَحَمَّلْنَاهُمْ فِي الْبَرِّ وَالْبَحْرِ وَرَزَقْنَاهُمْ مِنَ الطَّيِّبَاتِ وَفَضَّلْنَاهُمْ عَلَى كَثِيرٍ مِّمَّنْ خَلَقْنَا تَفْضِيلًا. Indeed, we gave nobility and rank to the children of Adam, taking them over the land and the ocean, and giving Adam, or the children of Adam, marked preference over the rest of creation. As we mentioned, the marked preference of the human being over the rest of the creation is this al-aql, is the mind, the rationale, the brain, the intellect, the ability to decipher and to understand. That we by choice, we decide to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. whereas the angels are just programmed to obey Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this use of the lub, the aql, the rational, the mind, the intellect, that when we submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it raises us a rank above the angels, that we are obeying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala via our own free will or via our own choice. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala highlights this inside this surah. هل أتى على الإنسان حين من الدهر لم يكن شيئا مذكورا إنا خلقنا الإنسان من نطفة أمشاج نبتليه فجعلناه سميعا بصيرا. That indeed we created the human being from the mixed water of the male and the female, put it together, that becomes the beginning of the human being. من نطفة أمشاج نبتليه. And the reason of creating the human being is نبتليه, as Ibn Kathir mentions, لنختبره, to test the human being. Just like in the beginning surah of this Juz, is blessed surahs, as we've been discussing, Surah Al-Mulk, Surah Tabarak, whereby Allah mentions, هو الذي خلق الموت والحياة ليبلوكم أيكم أحسن عملا. He created death and life to see who amongst you is going to be best in action. So the role of creating the human being and placing the human being upon this earth is لنبتليه, to test the human being and to find out that human being. لنبتليه فجعلناه سميعا بصيرا. We give him the faculties of hearing and seeing, so that individual can be either individual إِنَّا هَدَيْنَاهُ السَّبِيلَ إِمَّا شَاكِرًا أَوْ كَفُورًا. Then we guided him to the right path, or shown him the paths, the path of evil and the path of goodness. As Allah mentioned in other places inside the Quran, أَلَمْ نَجْعَلْ لَهُ عَيْنَيْنِ وَلِسَانًا وَشَفَتَيْنِ وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ. Have we not given him two eyes to glance and to see and to look? Have we not given him two lips? Have we not given him a tongue? And just like we've given you these faculties, so you should be able to traverse and see وَهَدَيْنَاهُ النَّجْدَيْنِ. And we've shown him the two paths, the path of shar, the path of evil, and the path of khair, the path of goodness. And via choice, you decide to go towards a path of evil, or you go towards the path of goodness. إِنَّا هَدَيْنَاهُ السَّبِيلَ إِمَّا شَاكِرًا أَوْ كَفُورًا. Indeed, we've guided him to the path, shown him the path that he needs to follow upon this dunya. And by him following that path, إِمَّا شَاكِرًا وَإِمَّا كَفُورًا, either becomes one full of gratitude and thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or he becomes an ungrateful individual. And that's the general linguistic meaning of a kafir. It's not just a disbelieving individual, it carries the general meaning of being full of ingratitude. One who is ungrateful to the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, doesn't recognize the creator, and becomes ungrateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Allah has created us and given us these faculties of hearing and seeing. See how we use these faculties to find the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we don't really need to find the path has been shown to us, that this is a path that we need to follow. And the blessings of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala increase the individual in gratitude. As if you look at Sulaiman alayhi salam, he mentions that when all his blessings are given to him, and the arsh of Bilqis, the throne of the queen of Sheba, Bilqis, is brought in front of him. What does he say? هذا من فضل ربي ليبلوني. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, this is a virtue, a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah has granted all his blessings to me. ليبلوني, to test me whether I'm going to be grateful or ungrateful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he understood that hidden message, that all these blessings which are from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is just to test my state of iman. And that's why many ulama go to the view that when a person is in a state of luxuries and goodness, they should be even more excelling in their ibadah towards Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, showing their gratitude. Because in times of hardships and difficulties, that's a normal characteristic of a human being, that they turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not to say they shouldn't turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but that would be a normal default position of a human being to do that. But when times are going good, a person is wealthy, a person has a good lifestyle, etc., people begin to drift away and begin to try to discover more and more luxuries and a good life, as they say, and they begin to forget Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or they begin to become ungrateful or become arrogant with the wealth that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or the position that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has bestowed upon them. Then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives this warning, إِنَّا أَعْتَدْنَا لِلْكَافِرِينَ السَّلَاسِلَ وَأَغْلَالًا وَسَعِيرًا. That indeed Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has promised those disbelieving individuals that chains and shackles to be placed around their necks and around them on that day. إِنَّ الْأَبْرَارَ يَشْرَبُونَ مِنْ كَأْسٍ كَانَ مِزَاجُهَا كَافُورًا. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, just is one verse speaking about the punishment of disbelieving individuals. A good few verses are now mentioned together about paradise. So as we come to the conclusion of the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is speaking here in these verses about the reward of paradise. That it's not all doom and gloom inside the Quran. There is passages inside the Quran which speak about paradise. And ulama mentioned this is one of the most profound passages or verses inside the Quran speaking about the reward of paradise for the believing individuals. Also read Surah Al-Rahman, the 55th chapter, reward inside there for people what will be given to them inside paradise. Surah Al-Waqi'ah, the 56th chapter as well, reward for the people who believe what will be given to them inside paradise. Also Ibn Qayyim al-Jawziyah in his Qasida, which is known as Qasida Nooniyah, thousands of lines of poetry, every single line of poetry ending with the harf noon. That's what's given the name of Nooniyah. It ends with the letter noon. Inside there, he has a good few hundred lines of poetry speaking about wasful Jannah, about the descriptive nature, about paradise. We can read that as well to see the blessings that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give to the people of paradise that be granted to them. So, innal abrara yashrabun. Indeed, the pious individuals will drink min ka'sin kana mizajuha kafura. Will drink from cups whereby you find it will be sealed, or the top of it will be sealed with kamfur. Now here ulama said whenever the word kas is mentioned inside the Quran, it refers to the pure wine, the pure drink that will be given to the believing individuals inside paradise. عَيْنًا يَشْرَبُ بِهَا عِبَادُ اللَّهِ يُفَجِّرُونَها تَفْجِيرًا. They'll be drinking from these fountains or from these rivers whereby we're exploding out and the water will be gushing out. We find that inside the Quran it mentions there's four rivers anhar inside paradise. So here this could be a spring. Aynun carries a more meaning of a spring, but the rivers inside paradise, 4 are mentioned inside the Quran. The river of pure water, the river of pure wine, the river of pure milk, and the river of honey which has not been contaminated are the 4 rivers inside paradise that we find. يوفون بالنذر ويخافون يوما كان شره مستطيرا. So that describes that this reward of paradise will be given to these individuals. Who are these individuals? يوفون بالنذر, they fulfill their oaths and their vows. ويخافون يوما كان شره مستطيرا, and they fear that day whereby there will be an evil ending or punishment for those individuals on that day. And the physical action they do in the face of this earth, وَيُطْعِمُونَ الطَّعَامَ عَلَى حُبِّهِ مِسْكِينًا وَيَتِيمًا وَأَسِيرًا. And they give food, or they feed the poor, ala hubbihi, even though they may have a need for that wealth, for that food, they feed the poor, the destitute, the orphans, and the captives. So a sign of Iman, belief, is spending and giving of the things that you love. As Allah mentions in the Quran, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. In the beginning of the 4th juz of the Quran, inside Surah Al-Imran, Allah mentions, لَن تَنَالُوا الْبِرَّ حَتَّى تُنْفِقُوا مِمَّا تُحِبُّونَ. You're never going to attain piety until you don't spend of the things that you love. So that's real piety, the things that you love and you want, that you spend of that to help other individuals. And Allah mentions in another place inside the Quran, وَمَنْ يُوقَ شُحَّ نَفْسِهِ فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. Whoever removes the greed, the covetousness from within themselves, expose that greed from their heart, فَأُولَٰئِكَ هُمُ الْمُفْلِحُونَ. Those are the real successful individuals. And then here comes the reason of why they're spending of their wealth or feeding the poor, the destitute, the orphans, the captives. إِنَّمَا نُطْعِمُكُمْ لِوَجْهِ اللَّهِ لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً وَلَا شُكُورًا. We feed you only for the face, seeking the face of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. لَا نُرِيدُ مِنْكُمْ جَزَاءً وَلَا شُكُورًا. We don't want no reward, and nor do we want any thanks from you. As some ulama explained, they don't even wait for a person to say to them, Jazakallah khairah, may Allah reward you or bless you for what you've done. They just feed them or do the action of charity and they walk away. And those are sometimes actions that we need to develop inside our lives, that our left hand doesn't know what the right hand has spent on that day. That we should have moments of secrecy, of whether it be praying in secrecy, of doing certain actions in secrecy, giving charity in secrecy, that we ourselves, we forget about it in this world. And it comes on the day of judgment. Sadaqah comes as a form of shield, as a form of protection, a form of intercession on that day that you've done such and such action. And especially maybe that moment in time the person may need that wealth or that property, and they decided to give it for a good cause and done it only for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And in all essence, that wealth won't be wasted or won't diminish, as we find in the hadith, مَا نَقَصَ مَالٌ مِّن صَدَقَةٍ, wealth doesn't diminish via the giving of sadaqah in the way of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So these are traits of those people who will be earning paradise, because many times we don't focus on the traits or the actions or the characteristics of the people of paradise, what they're supposed to do. Maybe we just focus upon just as-salah, which is a prime path to get to paradise, as Imam Sa'di inside his tafsir he mentions, but we fall short on the rest of these actions, which are, you can say, are equally or very, very important inside our lives: feeding the poor, doing charitable actions, taking care of society, as Allah describes inside the Quran, inside Surah Al-Imran, that those individuals who paradise will be granted to those individuals. What are the traits of those individuals? Those who الَّذِينَ يُنْفِقُونَ فِي السَّرَّاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ, those who spend in times of adversities, times of hardship, times of goodness. Those individuals يُنْفِقُونَ فِي السَّرَّاءِ وَالضَّرَّاءِ وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظِ, those who literally carries the meaning of swallow their anger. وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ, and they pardon and they forgive people. So very quickly we look at those other actions of paradise, and we don't seem to decipher or read the message of the Quran, that some of us, or many of us, are falling short. وَالْكَاظِمِينَ الْغَيْظِ, that swallowing one's anger, controlling one's anger, is a path to paradise. Because some of us, we lash out, or we become in our rage, and we find it's acceptable that we can behave in such a manner. Rather, to control one's anger is a path to paradise. وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ, another trait that many of us that we don't have, is pardoning and forgiving and overlooking people's mistakes, or what people may say or people may do, to forgive and forget, as they say. We may forgive, but we don't forget, unfortunately. So that's not a trait of people of paradise. Allah mentions وَالْعَافِينَ عَنِ النَّاسِ, they overlook, they pardon people. وَالْعَفُو means to scrub, to wipe away, rub something totally out. It doesn't exist in your memory bank or in your mind anymore, whatever may have taken place. And then Allah describes وَاللَّهُ يُحِبُّ الْمُحْسِنِينَ, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves the doers of good. So the doers of good is a long, difficult, tedious path to develop those other characteristics that we fail to develop inside our lives. So Allah mentioned that these are the individuals. إِنَّا نَخَافُ مِن رَبِّنَا يَوْمًا عَبُوسًا قَمْطَرِيرًا, we fear our Lord a day whereby you find that the face will become a horrible face, because abus means to make a horrible face, an upsetting face. So on that day, as we mentioned in the previous surah, whereby faces will be disfigured on that day and people will be upset on the day. فَوَقَاهُمُ اللَّهُ شَرَّ ذَلِكَ الْيَوْمِ, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on that day, these believing individuals will take them away from the evil of the day. وَلَقَّاهُمْ نَضْرَةً وَسُرُورًا, will give them the radiant glow, and happiness and bliss will be granted to those individuals. وَجَزَاهُمْ بِمَا صَبَرُوا جَنَّةً وَحَرِيرًا, and give them reward بِمَا صَبَرُوا, because of their patience will give them Jannah, وَحَرِيرًا, and give them silk. So patience regarding what we need to stay away inside this dunya, or patience regarding the actions we need to carry out inside this dunya. And here Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions paradise, and silk is mentioned here because, as we know, that for male subjects on this earth, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said that the wearing of gold and silk is something which is haram inside this dunya. And many times if you study the hadith, you find anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala makes haram inside this dunya, Allah won't grant it for the person inside al-akhirah, or will grant it for the person inside al-akhirah. So if you have it in this dunya, Allah won't give it to you inside al-akhirah. As we find some traditions, whoever drinks the alcohol of this world won't be granted the alcohol or the pure wine inside paradise, won't be granted to them. Whoever wears silk in this world won't be granted inside al-akhirah. So that small element of patience inside this dunya, or losing patience inside this dunya, takes away eternal bliss. And we know that the haram things inside this dunya that may feel temptuous, they have ongoing effects or side effects which are detrimental to the human being. Whereas inside the akhirah, Allah mentions sharaban tahura, mentions a pure drink, uncontaminated drink, which doesn't intoxicate the mind or the body or have this adverse effect upon the human being. وَجَزَاهُمْ بِمَا صَبَرُوا جَنَّةً وَحَرِيرًا, and because of their patience, we give them the recompense of the reward of paradise, and silk garments are granted to these individuals. مُتَّكِئِينَ فِيهَا عَلَى الْأَرَائِكِ, reclining and sitting upon the sofas, the couches. لَا يَرَوْنَ فِيهَا شَمْسًا وَلَا زَمْهَرِيرًا, whereby there will be no excessive sun, and there will be no excessive cold reclining or sitting inside paradise. And as we mentioned, that these in a good 15 or so ayat that we can say, all speaking about the descriptive nature of paradise, giving us that encouragement that there is going to be eternal bliss, eternal reward for those small amount of years that inside this dunya that we remain or abstaining from certain haram things or carrying out certain commandments that as a human beings we do at times find difficult, praying 5 times a day in the lengthy summer days, in the short winter days, stopping and breaking work and commitments and family, to stop and to remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to give zakat from our wealth, to perform hajj, etc., to fast the month of Ramadan. One should admit there are difficulties at times in carrying out these actions. As a human being, a person does think this takes away possibly from my time, from my sustenance, etc. Whereas the world is, everybody is enjoying themselves and having a good life, etc. And we find these certain commandments which are placed there. But this small dunya that we live in and a small span of being committed will grant us eternal bliss inside al-akhirah, eternal reward which has no ending. And even for sabr, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions that for sabr, إِنَّمَا يُوَفَّ الصَّابِرُونَ أَجْرَهُمْ بِغَيْرِ حِسَابٍ. Whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala speaks about patience, He gives them a reward without any hisab, no accountability. In general, the Quran mentions one good deed is multiplied 10 times over, or one good deed 100 times, or in traditions that we find a hadith 700 times over, etc. But when it comes to sabr, Allah mentions that there's no numeric format about it. It's an open, ongoing reward for those individuals who are patient upon this dunya. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala continues his discussion about what we're given to these individuals inside paradise. وَدَانِيَةً عَلَيْهِمْ ظِلَالُهَا. You find وَدَانِيَةً that the branches will be reclining, coming down upon them, or they'll be sitting in shades underneath these branches, and whatever desire from these branches, it will just flow down. So a person doesn't even need to raise their hands to grasp the fruits of paradise. They will just imagine it, and the branches will begin to come closer to them. That's how some ulama have described ما تشتهي الأنفس. What the soul desires, what it wants, it will be granted to the human being inside al-akhirah. Not whatever the soul desires inside this dunya, as we mentioned inside Surah Al-Insan, nafs al-lawama, the blameworthy soul, that whatever intuition, whatever the soul whispers, whatever the soul wants to do, it just wants to fulfill that straight away, immediately inside this dunya. The person controls their soul, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will grant the ultimate soul inside al-akhirah. وَأَكْوَابٍ كَانَتْ قَوَارِيرَ. Sorry, going back to the verse, وَدَانِيَةٍ عَلَيْهِمْ ظِلَالُهَا وَذُلِّلَتْ قُطُوفُهَا تَذْلِيلًا. And you find that its branches will come down for the individual inside paradise. وَيُطَافُ عَلَيْهِمْ بِآنِيَةٍ مِّن فِضَّةٍ. You find that cups of silver, وَأَكْوَابٍ كَانَتْ قَوَارِيرَ, and crystal glasses will be granted to those individuals inside paradise. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala uses the language inside this dunya of crystal, gold, silver, green couches, ornaments, silk, wine, milk, fruits, grapes, all these different elements that occur inside the Quran. As Ibn Abbas mentions, when Allah mentions right in the beginning, Surah Al-Baqarah, وَأُتُوا بِهِ مُتَشَابِهًا, that they be given something similar. So he highlights that the names are similar. Names that we enjoy inside as well, Roman, pomegranates, water, milk, honey, etc. You mentioned, we all understand these names. And in general, we understand what the context is. But as for the essence, it will be something totally different inside al-akhirah. So Allah just gives us snippets of the name inside this dunya to, if we can say such as, to entice us that those things that we enjoy of luxuries inside this dunya, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will give them inside al-akhirah. As for the exact entity of what it will be inside al-akhirah is unknown, because Allah mentions in Hadith Qudsi, أَعْدَدْتُ لِعِبَادِ الصَّالِحِينَ مَا لَا عَيْنٌ رَأَتْ وَلَا أُذُنٌ سَمِعَتْ وَلَا خَطَرَ عَلَى قَلْبِ بَشَرٍ. I prepared for my servants what no eye has seen, what no ear has heard, and no concept or thought has come across the heart or the mind of any individual. And then the Prophet ﷺ recited this verse from Alif Lam Mim Sajda, mentioned verse, فَلَا تَعْلَمُ نَفْسٌ مَا أُخْفِيَتْ لَهُم مِّن قُرَّةِ أَعْيُنٍ جَزَاءً بِمَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ. And no soul knows what is prepared for the coolness of his eyes on that day, a reward, جَزَاءً بِمَا كَانُوا يَعْمَلُونَ, reward for what they used to carry out inside this dunya. And this is the hidden message inside this verse, that reward for what they did inside this dunya even though our reward is not equal to paradise, as ulama mentioned. And the actions that we do, we shouldn't think that the actions that we do, that in contrast or in return, that our actions are equivalent to what paradise is going to be. Rather, you find that a small whip or a hair strand from a whip, that hair strand is better than the dunya wa ma fiha wa ma alayha. So that much space inside paradise, just one hair from what you used to flock or to whip an animal they used to do previously, just one hair strand, that in paradise is better than the dunya, whatever is upon it and whatever it contains. And all of us are rich individuals at the dunya. As in today's world, we look at figures and numbers that so and so is a billionaire and so owns such a wealth or whatever it may be. Look at the prophetic traditions of how it encourages us about gaining richness. The Prophet ﷺ mentioned in hadith inside Sahih Muslim that the 2 units of prayer, not Salatul Fajr itself, the 2 sunnah before Fajr is khairun min ad-dunya wa ma fiha aw ma alayha. To pray 2 sunnah before Fajr is better than the dunya and whatever is upon it or whatever it contains. So all of us, if we begin our day by praying those 2 sunnahs in the morning before the actual Fajr prayer, we are all billionaires. We're all rich individuals. But once again, because we can't physically deal with that wealth, so as human beings, we begin to weaken. That's why we're highlighting, read through the Quran, read through the reward, and read through the prophetic traditions to give us the encouragement to remain steadfast. قوارير من فضة قدروها تقديرا. These are goblets of silver or cups of silver that we granted to them, to these individuals. ويسقون فيها كأسا كان مزاجها زنجبيلا. And this drink that we're given to them, it will be mixed here with zanjabil. So we find here salsabil, zanjabil, kafur, all forms of drinks are going to be granted to the individuals inside paradise. عينا فيها تسمى سلسبيلا, flowing from a river or from a spring, which is given the name of salsabil. ويطوف عليهم ولدان مخلدون. And you find that these internal young youths will come upon them. إذا رأيتم حسبتهم لؤلؤا منثورا. If you used to see these young boys serving the drinks, etc., you'd think that they are shining pearls that are there in their beauty. وإذا رأيت ثم رأيت نعيما وملكا كبيرا. If you see immense reward and you see a great kingdom, a great dominion that we granted to the believers inside Jannah. أعليهم ثياب سندس خضر واستبرق. You find that their garments will be of green and brocade will be given to them, or istabrak is a type of silk granted to them. وحلوا أساورا. They'll be given jewelry will be given to them, bracelets will be given to them in fidda, from silver. وسقاهم ربهم شرابا طهورا. And then the Lord would give them a beautiful drink. So here some of the ulama say that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is offering this drink to the believing individuals. إن هذا كان لكم جزاء وكان سعيكم مشكورا. This is your reward. This is a reward for what you carried out inside this dunya. And this is وكان سعيكم مشكورا. And now your sa'i, your effort, as the Quran mentions that وأن الإنسان إلا ما سعى وأن سعيه سوف يرى. Man will only have whatever he strives for. Whatever he strives for will be granted to that individual. So here Allah is concluding that this human being, وَكَانَ سَعْيُكُمْ مَشْكُورًا, that your sa'i, your journey, your undertaking that you carried out, this you're going to be rewarded now. Is your gratitude is given to you, or thanks is given to you for what you tried to do upon this dunya. إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا عَلَيْكَ الْقُرْآنَ تَنزِيلًا. Imam Sa'di begins to highlight inside his tafsir that how do you now gain this paradise? Is via following the Quran. إِنَّا نَحْنُ نَزَّلْنَا الْقُرْآنَ تَنزِيلًا. We sent down the Quran in various stages. فَاصْبِرْ لِحُكْمِ رَبِّكَ وَلَا تُطِعْ مِنْهُمْ آثِمًا أَوْ كَفُورًا. فَاصْبِرْ لِحُكْمِ رَبِّكَ. He highlights inside his tafsir, this is the path to paradise, is the path of prayer and the path of patience. As Allah said inside the Quran, وَاسْتَعِينُوا بِالصَّبْرِ وَالصَّلَاةِ. Seek aid and assistance via patience and the prayer. By these 2 elements, a person traverses the path of paradise and eventually reaches paradise via the permission of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَلَا تُطِعْ مِنْهُمْ آثِمًا أَوْ كَفُورًا. Don't obey or follow those individuals who are rebellious or those disbelieving individuals. As Allah said inside the Quran, وَإِن تُطِعْ أَكْثَرَ مَنْ فِي الْأَرْضِ يُضِلُّوكَ عَنْ سَبِيلِ اللَّهِ. If you obey most of the people on the face of the earth, most of al-insan, most of humanity, they're going to take you away from the path of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So you find in certain narrations that from every 1,000, only one will go to paradise. And the rest of the 999 are all heading towards the hellfire. And some other narrations mention from every 10,000 what will happen to human beings. So we follow the common human being. Even the surah is speaking about the common human being and warning the common human being that you need to stay away from the path of disobedience. You need to follow the path of gratitude and thanks to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to gain His ultimate reward. وَاذْكُرِ اسْمَ رَبِّكَ بُكْرَةً وَأَصِيلًا. Remember Allah in the morning and the evening. وَمِنَ اللَّيْلِ فَاسْجُدْ لَهُ وَسَبِّحُ لَيْلًا طَوِيلًا. And remember Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the evening, prostrate to Him, and remember, praise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala during the night. Based upon this verse, ulama have extracted this is the 5 daily prayers. So the path of reading the Quran, the path of patience, the path of the 5 daily prayers is all the paths or the ways to get this reward of paradise that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned earlier on. Inna ha'ulai yuhibbun al-ajila. But once again, those individuals, and most of us, we love al-ajila. We love the fleeting, the fleeing, the temporal things of this dunya. We like them. وَيَذَرُونَ وَرَاءُهُمْ يَوْمًا ثَقِيلًا. And they leave behind them that severe, that hard day. We're not worried about the harsh day, the difficult day of Yawm al-Qiyamah. نَحْنُ خَلَقْنَاهُمْ وَشَدَدْنَاهُمْ. We're the ones that created them, gave them this power, this strength. وَشَدَدْنَا أَسْرَهُمْ. Gave them inner power and strength. وَإِذَا شِئْنَا بَدَّلْنَا أَمْثَالَهُمْ تَبْدِيلًا. We can change them. So the Quran begins by speaking about the essence of the human being, how weak the human being was, how powerful and strong the human being becomes, is all a blessing from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. إِنَّ هَذِهِ التَّذْكِرَةِ. Indeed, this is a reminder. Whether it be the reminder of the last day or the reminder of the verses of the Quran, فَمَنْ شَاءَ اتَّخَذَ إِلَىٰ رَبِّهِ سَبِيلًا. Whoever wants to take the path to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is indeed, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then concludes the surah by mentioning, يُدْخِلُ مَنْ يَشَاءُ فِي رَحْمَتِهِ. Whoever makes that effort, and we may fall short, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will enter that individual into His mercy. وَالظَّالِمِينَ أَعَدَّ لَهُمْ عَذَابًا أَلِيمًا. And those who are the wrongdoers, the oppressing individuals, the oppressors, for those individuals, Allah has prepared for them a severe chastisement and punishment has been prepared for those individuals. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make us amongst those individuals who are under the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and not under the wrath and the anger and the punishment of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Subhanak Allahumma wa bihamdik. Ashhadu an la ilaha illa anta astaghfiruka wa atubu ilayk.
تبارك الذي بيده الملك وهو على كل شيء قدير.